A record-breaking individual performance should be among the more straightforward things a franchise can build on. When a player reaches a historic milestone faster than nearly anyone else in the history of the sport, the expectation is that the organization around her rises to the occasion. What happened instead was a structural failure that rendered the achievement almost irrelevant by the final buzzer. The problems on the floor were not subtle. Rather than centering the offense around the most dangerous player on the court, the scheme deployed by head coach Stephanie White consistently pushed her off the ball and isolated her from the action. Defenders recognized this early. They applied full-court pressure with confidence, running at her from 94 feet away, because the system gave them little reason to do otherwise. Help was not coming. The threat of secondary actions was minimal, and the opposing defense adjusted accordingly. Pick-and-roll execution, one of the most basic tools available to any professional coaching staff, was nearly absent. The few attempts that were made lacked timing, lacked spacing, and produced nothing of value. Players who were not directly involved in possessions stood static, failing to apply pressure on the weak side or create movement that might have drawn defensive attention. The result was a predictable half-court offense that a prepared opponent could neutralize without much difficulty. This is where Stephanie White's coaching decisions become genuinely difficult to defend. At the professional level, the baseline expectation when your primary ball handler is being harassed the full length of the court is to provide her with a clean entry point, a solid screen, a secondary cutter, any action that forces the defense to make a choice. That did not happen with any consistency. The players around her were passive to the point of appearing disengaged, and the coaching staff made no visible adjustment to address it. The salary investment in this roster makes the performance harder to overlook. Players on premium contracts produced little that could be described as professional-grade basketball. The interior presence, which should have provided physical post positioning, paint control, and reliable finishing, instead contributed a series of poor footwork decisions and offensive fouls. These were not the result of aggressive officiating. They were the product of lazy technique and poor preparation. Veterans who have been in this league long enough to understand situational basketball showed no capacity to self-correct when the designed play broke down. The moment the ball left their immediate vicinity, their effort level dropped. The turnover margin in the closing periods compounded an already difficult situation. Loose passes, poor decisions under pressure, and a general lack of discipline in late-game execution allowed the opposing team to extend or maintain leads at exactly the moments when this team needed stops and scores. These are correctable problems. They are the kind of problems that a coaching staff is responsible for addressing, and they have not been addressed. What makes the situation more pointed is what one younger player did in the middle of all of it. Her performance was, by any reasonable measure, the best of her professional career. She shot efficiently, hit difficult shots, and competed with a level of engagement that the veterans around her did not match. That kind of breakout performance, in a different context, becomes the story of the night. Here, it was absorbed into a loss that should not have happened. The collective failure of the unit erased it. The closing sequence will be discussed for some time. Down 2 points with possession and time to work. The ball did not find its way to the player best equipped to make a play off the dribble. Instead, the offense stalled. The shot clock became an issue, and the ball was entered into a crowded post for a slow, heavily contested attempt. On the final possession, the team's most capable scorer was left open on the perimeter. Her teammate, rather than locating her, took a contested shot that missed. The play that was available, the play that had worked in a nearly identical situation in a prior game, was not executed. Stephanie White has run this offense before. The coaching staff has seen what this team is capable of when ball movement is prioritized, and the primary scorer is given clean actions to work from. The failure here was not a lack of information. It was a failure of preparation, of in-game adjustment, and of basic decision-making in the moments that define the outcome. This pattern raises questions that the organization will eventually have to answer directly. This team's win-loss record in competitive games correlates heavily with whether their best player performs at an extraordinary level. When she does, they can beat most opponents. When she has a difficult night or when defenses commit to taking her away, the system around her produces very little. That is not a sustainable model. It reflects either a coaching philosophy that has not evolved to protect its most valuable asset, or an unwillingness to build offensive infrastructure that functions independently of individual heroics. There is also a broader issue with how Stephanie White has managed personnel in these situations. The rotations in critical stretches have not always reflected the score or the defensive matchups. Players who were not producing were left on the floor. Adjustments that became obvious in the third quarter were not made until the fourth, if they were made at all. These are the kinds of decisions that separate coaches who manage games from coaches who react to them. And too often this staff has been in reactive mode. The fan response has been pointed. The commentary around this team increasingly focuses not on the talent available, which is evident, but on whether the structure around that talent is capable of converting it into wins. The record-breaking performance that should have generated straightforward celebration instead generated a much more complicated conversation about organizational direction. The individual player in question has done her part. She has produced at a historic rate, carried possessions that should have been shared, and competed under conditions that would expose the limits of a lesser player. The system has not met her at that level. Stephanie White's offensive design has not provided her with the spacing, the movement, or the situational execution that a player of her caliber requires. That is a coaching problem. It is not a talent problem. If this staff does not make material changes to how it constructs and executes its offense, specifically in terms of ball movement, screening action, and late-game decision-making, the results will continue to follow this same pattern. A historic individual career will accumulate alongside a win-loss record that does not reflect it. The record-breaking night that should have been a high point will instead be remembered as an early example of a recurring structural failure that the coaching staff had every opportunity to fix and did not. The talent in this organization is not the question. The question is whether the people responsible for deploying it are capable of doing so at the level the moment requires. Based on what this team has shown under Stephanie White's direction, that question remains unanswered in the most unfavorable way possible. The roster construction argument only goes so far. There are analysts and commentators who will point to depth issues, to scheduling fatigue, to the inherent difficulty of building a winning team around a single transcendent talent. Those are legitimate variables in a broader conversation, but they do not explain what happened in the final 2 minutes of a game this team had every opportunity to win. Depth does not call the plays. Fatigue does not decide who gets the ball on the last possession. Those decisions belong to the coaching staff, and on this night, those decisions were wrong. What is increasingly clear is that Stephanie White has not demonstrated the ability to make real-time adjustments when the game shifts. There is a version of coaching that functions well in practice settings, in film sessions, in the structured environment of a prepared game plan. And then there is the version that is required when a defense takes something away and a team needs to find an answer in the moment. The second version is where this staff has consistently fallen short. When the opposing coach made her adjustment, White had no visible counter. The offense ran the same actions, got the same results, and the game slipped away in the same fashion it has slipped away before. Player development is another area that deserves scrutiny. Several players on this roster entered the season with defined roles and have not grown beyond them under this coaching staff. When a team has a superstar who draws constant defensive attention, the players around her should be improving their ability to punish defenses for that attention. Spot-up shooting should be getting sharper. Off-ball movement should be becoming more sophisticated. Secondary playmaking should be developing. None of that is visibly happening. The supporting cast is not worse than last year, but they are not measurably better either. And in a league where development is continuous, standing still is effectively moving backwards. The timeout usage throughout the game also reflected poorly on the staff. There were stretches where momentum shifted clearly and decisively toward the opponent, where a stop-and-play to reset, to settle the group, and to draw up a specific action would have been the standard response from a competent bench. Those timeouts were not always taken. When they were taken, the adjustments drawn up did not address what the defense was doing. Players returned to the floor running the same sets into the same walls. Professional basketball, at its core, is a game of problem-solving. The team that identifies what is working, eliminates what is not, and executes its best available action under pressure is usually the team that wins close games. This team, under its current coaching structure, has not demonstrated that capability consistently. The talent on the floor has papered over some of those deficiencies. It cannot paper over all of them, and it certainly could not paper over them on this particular night. The record will show a loss. The box score will show a historic individual line sitting inside a team performance that did not deserve it. And the coaching decisions that produced that outcome will remain on the record as well, available for review the next time this staff is asked to win a game that matters.